24% in 1 year as a result of COVID at the expense of the poor. We have seen half a century of transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich. It has got to stop, but how we stop it I don't know, because there's been an absolute failure to implement even the smallest tax on wealth at the international level and at most national levels too. Momentous changing. We need foresight. Absolutely. We need to know what the future outcomes are likely to be. And my argument here is that we need civil protections that are not slightly bigger than the ones we've got now. They are an order of magnitude bigger. Where in southern France last summer we had 2,000 firefighters fighting the wildfires in the Garonne, well, next time we're going to need 20,000, not 2,000. I'm afraid we have to get used to that idea, because such are the hazards we face that it's the only way we will get them under control. So yes, of course, we should move from emphasis on response to emphasis on mitigation, preparation and disaster reduction. But you cannot not spend on disaster response. Therefore, you have to do that, and you have to do it well. I am glad that the European Union exists, and I'm glad to be a citizen of it too, and I'm glad that it has a mechanism that helps to coordinate. But I think actually they should put many, many more resources into that. The people are there, the expertise is there, the needs are going to show up very, very quickly. You could say, though, that response is also mitigation, because one of its future key tasks is going to be damage limitation. Anyway, if you want to see this again, all you have to do is put m.slideshare.net/DE, and I'll tell you can get the whole and PowerPoint on your phone, and that's information technology for you, so thank you very much.
Well, excellent talk by the two keynote speakers. Before the 9:45, we still have about 7 minutes for the question and answer from the floor, and we also invited two keynote speakers to the stage and answer the comment or question from the floor. So, my dear audience, any comment or question to the two prominent speakers? Yes, we have first one.
Thank you both. That was really informative. Tom, two-part question for you. The shorter question. You have so much going. Just a sense of order of magnitude. How many people do you have? How much money? The more important question, anticipation. The illustration you gave of completing the work and being able to present it more than half a year ahead of the policy decision-making process is so important. Most of the people here are not as directly connected to the process as you are. And so maybe we can become good at anticipating. But even if we've anticipated and written the report in advance, we don't necessarily get invited. Your thoughts about how the research community can make sure that they get invited if they have anticipated and done the great work ahead?
Yes, thanks. Very good question. On the first, yes, we are. My group is about 50 scientists and about 70 IT developers, because it's a lot of systems. So we have quite a big group doing this work. But we're not alone. We have a research center of 3,000 people, and the point is to leverage. It's not to do it alone. We always have to work with others, with you, with all. We work with so many organizations outside to leverage. The Copernicus system has a large budget, 15 million per year, which is companies doing the work for us. We just manage the contracts and all, and of course the science behind it. But the power of getting the data and delivering the maps and the early warning systems and whatever, running them, is done by the industry, by the overall industry. So that's a bit the scale of it. On the other part, yes, we are a special organization because we are in a political organization, but there's similar things in other countries. The Italian civil protection has a very similar system where the scientists are in the system and they have competence centers that have contracts with them. And this is something that in Europe at least is being done more and more to have contractual relations with scientists, that this link is predefined and is well organized, and it has a lot of benefits. On the policy part, it depends in every country. It's very different in the context. But the framework programs of research in Europe, any research funded by the European system, now it's called the Horizon 2020, Horizon Europe programs, always have an aspect of connecting the research immediately with the policymakers. This is part of the program. It has to be like that, and it's an opportunity then to make those links. But I saw many posters yesterday where people were on the ground working with local communities, and I think that is a very important thing. Don't be afraid to approach the people. It requires building of trust. It requires being there perhaps for a longer time, but once you have the trust, and there was an example of the Italian who were working here in Japan that said, I'm very trusted by the Japanese authorities. I think that is really what can be built and should be built.
If I could add something about anticipation, I believe that black swans don't exist in this field. In fact, I think the black swan in disaster risk reduction is extinct, and its ecological niche has been occupied by the red herring. And I did produce some thoughts more systematically on that in a PowerPoint, which I'd be happy to give to anyone who wants to see that improve. But we actually have some quite good foresight projects around. The British government, for all its faults, has got a government office for science that is doing great work on foresight. And there was an interesting European project called I Know Futures. The website's still up. They looked at 1,500 different things that might happen in the future in terms of the scenario and the weak signals whereby we might know that it is beginning to coalesce, crystallize, come to the fore, in other words, happen. So I think there's a lot that we can anticipate in the future, but the question then is, are we going to be ready for it or not?
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the floor? Please take time. Yes, we have one from behind. I think the two speakers gave very in-depth view about future risk.
This is Cheryl speaking. I just got thoughts on my mind. I don't think that's a question. So as David mentioned earlier, you mentioned a lot of democratic issues and also participatory communication planning. So all of these activities is pointing to the good governance. So I don't know if I'm right to summarize that good governance could help the BRR work much easier. I don't know. I'm thinking the right track. Thank you.
Perhaps a first comment from my side. And I think in both our talks it came through that this is absolutely important, the governance, also the vulnerability. And perhaps I will direct you to the INFORM framework, the INFORM risk framework, where we look at indicators that describe risk. And about a third of the indicators are on vulnerability. 2/3 of the indicators are about vulnerability and governance. So one is vulnerability, which is a bit the context, the white part of the egg, and then there's part of lack of coping capacity, which is the governance part of it included in. So it's super important, and in the INFORM index, this is included in the description of risk.
I think good governance actually stems from democratic participation. And I think if you look at the case of Turkey, you can see that. I don't really want to say much more about that until I've had a few beers, or maybe a quantity of sake or something. But there were clearly implications, and very strong ones, the role of democracy in responding to the great Turkish crisis caused by the earthquakes of last month. And that is true in many instances. There are countries that are over-centralized. This is a question very much of local democracy leading to and engendering local participation. All disasters are local, no matter how large they are, because the local area is the theatre of operations. So that's something we might reflect on quite profoundly. What scope is there to organise under particular systems and above all under particular ideologies?
We should take most few minutes more comment or more kind of you want to know from the two very excellent speakers. Any other point from the floor or from the co-chair?
I would like to congratulate both the speakers, but also ask a question of Professor David. You know, your talk was brilliant, comprehensive. Most of the members of GSDRI are at universities. So how do we translate all of this complexity into the new kinds of programs that we offer for our students? And how do we promote the career development of young faculty members who are working in these complex topics?
I think the answer to that requires a 1,000-page volume. However, there are just occasionally small insights that come from particular circumstances. I was once teaching 28 emergency managers who were struggling to learn how am I going to write emergency plans to manage events. I gave them a scenario. It was for a train crash in Ohio that led to a toxic flood and how it was managed. They said, oh, very interesting, but not much like our case. We were in Milan, in northern Italy. In the train crash, it took them 5 days to set up a command post, and they were slow at evacuating, and the result was fatalities. Well, a week later, the Mont Blanc tunnel fire occurred. It took them 5 days to set up a command post. They were slow in evacuating. The result was increased casualties. So they all came back the week later and said it was just like that train crash in many respects. So in point of fact, we can take information, we can adapt it, and we can show them that this is valid and useful. But it does also remind me of when I was once interviewed for a job which I failed to get for very obvious reasons. And it was a job in transportation planning, and they asked me rather aggressively, I was very young at the time, how would you convince the manager of a bus garage to adopt your innovations? And frankly, I hadn't a clue. But the fact is, the magic answer is, if you make their lives easier, certainly they'll adopt your I mean, it's clear.
I'm not from the academic world, but I have some thoughts. I think we all have a day job, no? And we work at the university, we teach, we do science. But I think we also have a responsibility as people that understand a bit this context in society. You know, we are also citizens of society, we're part of our local communities. You know. Going into schools, working with children, bringing this story can help that more kids go into science, girls and boys, that they spread through their families also this learning and this understanding. We have a very narrow window for action. This was said by the IPCC. We have to transform society now, so we have to really work with the children now and bring this message as much as possible. So in your evenings or on your Saturdays, or take a day off and go to school, also to bring this message. I think that's part of what we have to do.
If I don't just add one thing, my university, UCL, has a school, and I went there, and it was the 13th of March 2017. The reason I say that is because the 12-year-olds were studying pandemics. I gave them the spiel on pandemics, and they asked questions. One of them said, you said it would take more than 6 months to make a vaccine. How could you be sure that the virus wouldn't mutate so that the vaccine didn't work? That was a 12-year-old, 3 years before the pandemic. I had a clue what the answer was at the time. Now, of course, I've read umpteen million things and I've got a better idea of sorts. But there you go.
Yeah, burning question from here.
I have a question for Dr. Alexander. Dr. Alexander, I have a question for you. I really like this complex science for disaster risk. I was wondering how we can tie the wonderful theory into the Sendai framework. Thank you.
I give up. Well, maybe I should leave that to you. Classic cop-out. And I'm going to have to give a better answer than that, aren't I? Well, you've got a number of imperatives in the Sendai framework. My objective here is to try to understand disasters better by asking the questions. What is patently clear from my very thin presentation is that I don't have the answers. But on the other hand, it occurs to me that often we haven't been asking the right questions. For example, the assumption that if you just give people knowledge, they will say, oh, thank you very much, and act on it to the betterment of humanity, unfortunately simply isn't right. I keep a file of stuff called The World As It Is, in which I cut and paste stuff out of what I read. Not to use in a plagiarized article by myself, but simply to remind myself of what is actually going on in the world. There is good, but there is also bad. What we have to do is somehow combat the bad. Well, we've got the Sendai framework, which is a series of imperatives which have been well articulated. We can certainly wave that in their faces. But we need to understand why they are not doing disaster risk reduction, why they are not giving priority to it. So in many respects, I think the value of theory of this kind or something similar to it, I don't necessarily propose that you must use my methodology. You've got a better idea, excellent. But the value of it will be to show that we have to ask the right questions. We have to be aware of how things really are in the world, in a world in which there is increasing polarity. And polarity is not good for this. Amartya Sen, for example, has written a number of times that if you want a productive society with a buoyant economy, you need a good health system. We therefore have to ask, why do countries not invest enough in their health systems? Why not? Well, it is so obvious, but there are so many things. For example, a tiny wealth tax would leave the billionaires with as much money as they had before, indeed more. But if that money were used wisely, it could solve enormous problems around the world, and it just isn't used wisely. Therefore, we need to know why. So, yes, it is essential we have as a starting point the Sendai framework, but that will actually not solve the problems unless we can indeed connect it to the reasons why it is not entirely successful. By the way, I don't think that we can congratulate ourselves on having reduced the death toll in disasters, because it is spiky, and that could easily mean that a very large event, for example an earthquake in Tehran, which according to a Japanese scenario could kill almost 500,000 people, because 50% of the building stock is not anti-seismic. That could change the picture of death tolls considerably.
Thank you very much for sharing the brilliant insights.
Because we run out of time, because only 5 minutes before the next section. Please join us, give a big hand to the team.
If someone is interested in one of these newsletters, they're here on the stage.
Thank you. We have coffee break, but it's short now. We'll come back at 10. They need to go upstairs for the coffee break. And I have two more important announcements to make. One is the Uchikawa Open Laboratory. Still, we have 11 seats available. And it's really a world-class laboratory that will give you a unique perspective as a researcher and also as a citizen about the disaster risk. So if you haven't enrolled, please enroll. Get into that. You will love it. And if you want to join in the front desk, please ask the students to enroll and register your name. And those who haven't removed their posters, would you please remove your posters? Yes, and we have to start the next session. And before that, I would request all the panelists that can you bring your slides here so that we can put it into the on the computer. Yes.
Today's, I think, so far, and this is the final session, and we are looking forward for a fruitful discussion here today.
All right, so I'd like to invite our first speaker, Professor Nobu Mori. He'll be reporting out on the discussion on big science for disaster risk reduction. Nobu?
John, thank you very much for my introduction. Professor Matsushima and myself were in charge of the panel discussion today, big science for disaster risk reduction, especially focusing on large-scale experimental facilities. So we have 5 panels. We have 5 panels first, and then after that we discuss in detail. So first speaker was Dr. Nelson Prada from NYED. So he talked about a very comprehensive observation network, including seismic signal, storm motion, volcanic activity, and tsunamis in Japan, so-called MORA. And it is indicated top right panel, so it's kind of state of art of the comprehensive seismic and tsunami, including volcano network in Japan. And the second speaker was Dr. Tabata from same institute, NYED, but he talked about the large-scale storm shaking table, so-called e-defense, indicated middle of the panel. And after that, Dr. Suzuki from Podan Airport Research Institute in Japan introduced their very large-scale super tank for tsunamis, indicated right bottom panel. And I myself introduced a large coastal wave group in the world. And after that, Professor Matsushima advertised GSDRI collaborative research facilities. We 5 speakers came from different sections, from seismic observation in the field and structure engineering, coastal engineering, tsunami engineering, and so on. So this is one of the examples of the e-defense experimental result. This is a 10 stories building by e-defense, and Kobe earthquake signal is coming. So I forgot that the scale of this experiment, but it must be 1/4 scale. And it's a kind of largest strong shaking experimental facility in the world. Yeah, for earthquake is already announced. I can read it one more time. Yeah, this kind of facility is so nice, but so nice for taking different measurement and signal, but it's very expensive to do it. And the second experiment, second introduction, this is John Snow's supertank in OSU, Oregon State University, US. So this is a tsunami flume in US. I just borrowed from my friend from sandbox from Oregon State. So tsunami, like a wave is coming from left to the right, and it hit to the wall like this. So this kind of large-scale facility is very useful for understanding tsunami forcing acting on the structures. Then after that, actually do it one more time. Yeah, this is also kind of world's largest tsunami flume in the world. So you will see the very big splash and strong forces acting on the vertical wall in the bottom right. Then this is a summary of the large-scale experiment facility for disaster risk reduction. So from scientific point of view and managing point of view, these facilities are very good but very expensive to handle. So sharing facility is important to do. For example, US already has a very nice sharing facility research program, so-called NEAS, NEES, founded by National Science Foundation. And the GSDRI also support sharing facility, including travel expense. And the second is sharing data set with systematical format is very important because each facility has a historical data set by several different experimental data sets, but it's not very easy to use for outside the people. And the digital foundation to sharing experimental data set is also important to share. And the third is the development of new instruments and sensors, because nowadays sensors and instruments have been developed, so we can use different types of sensors from cheap, small to large and expensive. So compared with 10 to 20 years ago, nowadays we can use the different sensors and we can get different knowledge from the large scale facility. And it is also part of the data trees using large scale experimental facilities. And the fourth is the benchmark test for numerical model, including structure modeling or tsunami modeling and others. We have many different numerical models, but we don't know much about the real performance of the individual numerical models. So the use of the large facility, we can test performance with a different numerical model, so using benchmark test type research campaign. The fifth is a hybrid physical and numerical model. This part has been developed in structural engineering, but it must be pretty good to expand hybrid physical and numerical experiment idea to other areas, including structure, soil, or tsunami soil interaction. And the fourth is industrial education. This is a little beyond to this session, but as you saw in this video, many people surprised how waves impact is very intense by visually and sound, pressure, and so on. So everybody can understand how some disaster can be very intense even in experimental scale. So we include educational part as I have so this is the end of the summary of our session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and we'll bring the panelists back up, so we'll hold questions. Seems to be the style here. So
thank you so much. So now it's my pleasure to invite Professor Tetsuya Takimi to the stage now. He's the chair of the Sustainability around Integrating Climate Change Action, SDGs, VDR, and Data Experience Sharing track that we held yesterday. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much. Thank you for introduce me. I'm Tsung-Yi from GSDRI. I have chaired the session 2B with John Gordon Lee on sustainable disaster risk reduction. I will report the session summary. Okay. So this is the session description. This session shares current activities on studies related to climate change and their impact assessments from the gathering member institutes, and highlight experience on the linkage among the research community, the policymakers, and the practitioners, and to try to understand the importance of data sharing experiences from field measurements for sustained period of time in order to monitor climate change, long-term climate changes. The objective is share current understanding of climate change assessment from scientific and engineering viewpoints, and we will discuss the adaptation strategy for climate change and experience on field measurements among the participating institutes will be shared to discuss the significance of the data sharing. Okay, we have 5 panelists from our session. The first talk is given by Professor Wei-Jin Ma from Chinese Academy of Sciences. He demonstrated the field experience of field measurements in the Tibetan Plateau region for a long period of time, and he emphasized the importance of observations, especially in data-sparse regions, in order to monitor long-term climate changes and the impacts of, for example, extreme weather, and emphasize the continuous efforts are required to obtain long-term data sets. Professor Fatima Akhtar from University of Dhaka, she shows the research progress in the cyclone disaster in Bangladesh. And she has demonstrated the impact of sea surface temperature on cyclones, intensity, and tracks, and how those cyclones affect the local scale hazards. And she has also demonstrated the disaster management in Bangladesh. And she emphasized that Bangladesh is moving from reactive humanitarian relief to proactive disaster risk reduction by establishing early warning system, and there are a number of institutional commitment from technical monitoring, capacity building, preparedness, and responses. And also she has shows efforts by the Bangladesh government on strategy of disaster risk reduction by focusing on monitoring, observations, forecasting, warning, information dissemination. And also, as an example, she has demonstrated the establishment of multi-purpose cyclone shelters for the coastal greenbelt. Professor Makua Mukherjee from IIT Roorkee, she has emphasized the importance of interconnectedness of COP21 and Sendai framework and SDGs. She demonstrated the example of understanding risk from on the urban viewpoints, such as urban heat island or air pollution, and she has demonstrated the importance of geospatial mapping of natural ecosystem in order to identify hotspots at risk in very local scales. And the GIS platform is useful to identify such urban risks. And also she has emphasized how to incorporate similar framework for disaster risk reduction at local scale or urban scales. Mr. Nobuya Sagita from BMKG and currently at GSDRI, he demonstrated the weather forecasting at BMKG in Indonesia, and he introduced the hydrometeorological hazard in Indonesia are thunderstorm, local scale thunderstorms, landslides, and floods. And BMKG is providing early warning services as a multi-hazard early warning system, and they produce high-resolution weather prediction products and emphasize the importance of impact-based forecast, not only forecasting weather phenomena themselves, but also emphasize how those extreme weather impacts to the society. And also, BMKG is conducting special event weather forecast for tourism and sports events. And also, he introduced the activity of BMKG in building community awareness by climate field schools or fishing weather schools, aviation weather schools. And also BMKG conducting an analysis of climate trend of long-term risk in order to identify future risk zones at local scales. Professor Lifa Vaishnav from Siddhartha University, she introduced some of the activity at her university for green and sustainable development and the actual practices at the Siddhartha University in terms of education, and she has emphasized the importance of the multidisciplinary approach in order to build community awareness and lead a sustainable initiative and share experiences in establishing community science center. So this is the outcome of our sessions. We have itemized these points. The first one is to recognize the importance of long-term in-situ field observation and data accumulation for climate change monitoring in changing climate, especially for vulnerable region. Sharing such observation data will be useful not only for research purposes, but also for regional collaboration and cooperation. Impact-based forecasting and future projection is important to build a community to be aware of disaster mitigation, climate change adaptation. Future projection for hazard, vulnerability, and exposure will help societies for sustainable risk financing. Alignments of various different frameworks, SDGs and the framework climate change will help to address real-world problems with same strategic interventions. And it is important to recognize that multidisciplinary approach is very important and should be emphasized. And for example, connection among environmental or climate research and solid earth research. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor. And I'll hand over to John to introduce the next speaker. Thank you.
So our next is Session 2C, Gender and Inclusivity in Direct Disaster Risk Reduction Policy and Practice. And I'd like to invite Poonam Yadav to the stage. And no pressure, but I heard on the train ride home this was a very lively discussion, so I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you, Don and Kosul, for co-chairing the session, and thank you everybody for coming to this plenary. I just want to start by saying a disaster is not natural; it is socially constructed, and that was our ontological positioning for this panel. So that's why our outcomes are also based on that. So these were the panel members. Peter Salmons chaired the session. Grace Yen was the discussant for the session, and we had 4 panel members: myself, Professor Tsung-Yi, and I, Professor Anna Maria, and Dr. Miwako. Most of the sessions were, most of the papers were on gender, various aspects of gender. A majority of the audience were women, of course, and we wondered where were the men? So thank you so much for coming here and still being here for this presentation. So, just want to give a brief introduction. Behind every disaster, there are people. People are related to one another through gendered power relations. Gender norms and unequal social, institutional, and cultural structures actually has impact on how one is going to experience disaster. So our experiences are constructed by unequal social, institutional, and cultural structures. Men are also impacted, although we don't talk about it. So our panel discussed gender inequality and inclusivity in DRI policy and practices. So on behalf of our panel, I'd like to share some of the insights from the panel, the key points that we discussed. So these were some of the key points that were brought at the panel discussion. Despite gender being considered in current DRR practices, it is often added at the end of the planning process. Gender is included, not mainstreamed, even though gender mainstreaming has been in the discussion conversation and in practices for a very long time now. Although gender social structures affect everybody in any society, gender equals women most of the time, often leaving men and sexual and gender minorities outside the gender discourse. Women are not a homogeneous category, often they are clubbed together. Various identities that we carry, each of us carry multiple identities, and all of those intersecting identities have impact on how we are going to experience disaster. Therefore, we talked about how the importance of intersectionality in disaster discourse. Sex and desegregated data has been emphasized even by Tsung-Yi framework, but actually when you look at it in practice, it is the data collection is very binary. So data is collected of the casualties based on sex, so men and women. Children are clubbed together. Although in recent years, disability has been part of the conversation when talking about DRR, but then often gender is not mentioned there. So all the disabled people, they have, as if they have no gender. Another important point we came up with was the portrayal of women in DRR discourse. So if you look at the DRR frameworks, women are imagined as victims, not as agents of change. And when women are talked about as agents, or agents of change, or leaders, they are also looked at within the victimhood framework. So women needs to be empowered, women needs to be included. So it is looked at within the victimhood framework. Whereas we talk about men, we take men as resilient being, as like somebody who's out there. We don't need to add a special category to that. Vulnerability is not a fixed category. It is not static, but it is a dynamic process. So I could be resilient in some instances, and within a few seconds there may be situations where I feel vulnerable. So categorizing some group of women as vulnerable at all times is not productive and does not reflect the reality on the ground and lived experiences of people in disaster context. Disaster is often seen as a technical fix, a material condition, and often objective structures are taken into consideration, but subjective structures, social structures, are not. So we also talked about bringing both material conditions as well as structural inequality into the conversation of disaster. We also need to rethink and question our own understanding of resilience. So resilience is often taken as something as very positive, even though we know that in some of our own cultural context, there is no exact translation of resilience. People try to make sense of it. So we do need to rethink what do we mean by resilience and what does it look like if we look at it through a gender lens. And also, I mean, being a gender scholar, when I think about resilience, I wonder, can one be resilient to domestic violence or gender-based violence? Siloization of a normal and disaster came out quite a lot, especially when we're talking about disability in disaster. What do we mean by that? Well, when we talk about siloed approach, we talk about institutions, we talk about academic research, we talk about policies, but also siloization of the normal from the disaster actually has negative impact. As earlier Professor Alexandra was also saying, if you're resilient in normal society, you can be resilient during disaster as well. So another point that came out in our conversation, in our discussion, was separation of usual from emergency. So emergency is seen as something very unique, and it is removed from the usual. If the usual is better, emergency situation is also being managed well. Pre-existing conditions affect not only post-disaster experiences, also the recovery efforts. So taking into consideration the existing unequal social structure is important. So these are some of the outcomes that we talked about, moving beyond gender binary. So when we talk about gender, it's not just about men and women, it is also not only about women, and it is not only about women as a homogeneous category, but we need to talk we need to include all gender into the conversation of DRR, including men. Intersectionality is extremely important to consider because people have, as I was saying earlier, people have different experiences depending on the different identities that they carry, and we do need to consider all of those identities and their intersecting impacts when thinking about DRR. So following the session, we talked about how can we engage with the Tsung-Yi framework in our own context, and we also came up with some recommendations, and these are the recommendations. So the first one is tackling inequalities at the root should be a priority for the implementation of the Tsung-Yi framework for action. In order to build back better, it is important to understand structural inequality. A gender perspective helps us understand the everyday experiences of people and their lived reality. Gender should be understood as relational. Why do we say that? We are related to one another through relation, and those relations are gendered. So if we understand gender as a relational category, we can understand the fluidity, and we can understand that men are also impacted by these gender constructions, not just women. So our final point is adopting an intersectional approach toward DRR policy will ensure inclusivity and equity in DRR practices. So these were the points these were the recommendations from our panel. And I thank you all for listening, and I will end the presentation here. Thank you.
Thank you. The next session is on the summary of putting health into disaster risk reduction and recovery, session 2D. The speaker needs no introduction, but it's my absolute pleasure and honor to introduce Professor Virginia Murray, she's the head of Global Disaster Risk Reduction UK and Health Security Agency. Over to you, Virginia.
Thank you very much. It was lovely to have health included properly in a GSDRI session. And I'm not head of Global Disaster Risk Reduction in the UK. I just work in the UK HSA. So just to control it a little bit. So it was really with real thanks to Andrew that his advocacy and the opportunity through GSDRI that we could have a health session. Might I take you back to reflect on the survey of who contributes where to the GSDRI science programme? And you might have seen that there was one little 1% for health. And having attended quite a few GSDRI meetings, I felt that it was really timely to make sure that we included health more clearly. So it was a real privilege to be part of this. So I thank Andrew, but I also thank Riyama, who came from WHO Kobe. Unfortunately, Emily Chan couldn't join us because she wasn't available in Hong Kong. But Genta was there, and Genta was amazing, and he has advocated for GSDRI. So let me just take you through what we were doing. We were talking about putting health into disaster risk reduction and recovery. This is really within the context of COVID-19 and some of the impacts that we were all reflecting on. So huge thanks again to both Andrew and Riyama. Our session objectives are appalling. They're far too long, there's far too many of them, but I just wanted to share with you some of the reflections we know that we needed to look at. So a lot of it was about the Sendai framework itself and how we can really engage with WHO. When WHO has been, the World Health Organization has been so committed to trying to support UNDRR and the health domains of the Sendai framework by delivering the WHO Health and Disaster Risk Management Framework and trying to bring that approach across the wider domains of all hazards. So we also looked at the research network that I feel is something that is very important because just like GSDRI, young scientists are critical to how we can develop for the future. But to us in health, it is just as critical, and we wanted to share some of these ideas. We wanted to reflect on how preparedness, response and recovery for future health and well-being areas might be of import, but also to try and find some sort of sustainable disaster resilience in a world that is so complex, as David was talking about this morning. So it was really about putting health into disaster risk reduction and recovery. We had a series of key questions, which I will bring you back to in a moment, but I thought I would take you through to the presentations themselves, which in summary we have a few thoughts on. First of all, let me introduce you to the World Health Organization Kobe Center. It is 1 hour by fast train from Kyoto. And I've never managed to bring them here before. So I am simply thrilled that my colleagues at Riyama and Mackie came, and I think quite a few would have seen them yesterday when they were here for the day. I'm sorry they've had to go to other meetings. But in the heart of the WHO Kobe Center, which is such an incredible resource, you have the Health Emergencies and Disaster Risk Management team who have a research network. And Riyama talked a little bit about this research network and how people could be participants and members of it. And we were really trying to engage. But also he was trying to share some of the outputs that have come through that I think is so important. So, allow me to introduce to you the present that Riyama gave Professor Tatana. A small book. A small book that represents a lot of Japan's incredible knowledge. We have a whole chapter specifically on what Japan has had to face. But this is the guidance on research methods for health emergency and disaster risk management, which was initially published in 2021, had a supplement added in 2022 about COVID, looking at the epidemic, and will update again in 2024. We don't normally print them out, but I asked specifically for Riemann to bring one copy. In fact, he brought two. So somebody might be able to ask for the second copy if you can really be very polite, otherwise they'll both be in the library here. Why does it matter? Because what we found is that health emergency disaster risk management is something that is frightening to people. People have never been quite sure about how they can investigate real-time events or even prepare to investigate them in time. But to do this, we can build a whole series of chapters, webinars, videos, podcasts to try and make this as accessible as possible. And the aim is that through WHO and its regional networks, this will be launched across the world soon to try and explain it. But one of the things I was so keen was that this should be linked directly to what GSDRI is doing, particularly on its capacity development. Now, it was very exciting to see this engagement because what we then had was a wonderful presentation from Genta. Genta, are you here today?
Here.
Good. Genta, I was so proud of your presentation, to hear you speak. I really want to celebrate you as a tremendously valuable young scientist, bringing into our world what you were doing, which is totally related to health and well-being. So I'm very sorry, I have taken that side, but also this one. So Genta, please will you comment on it, if need be. What Genta explained to us yesterday was that there is a real concern about how the elderly can walk in the event of a tsunami or other event to an evacuation centre. You talked about self-help, not just getting mutual aid. You shared some of the principles. You talked about how you manage the evacuation centres. But what you talked about was what we in our health domain normally regard as our business, but what you showed as a scientist working within GSDRI, that it's a partnership. It's a shared business. It's working together. And we said that whatever you publish from your lovely work, please can you make sure it goes into a health journal as well, so that we can celebrate it and understand how we can link to the work you're doing on your elderly here in Japan, when we know the rest of the world will be catching up with Japan in the future. So it was a tremendous presentation, and I thank you again. But what you did was to show that the science within GSDRI links to our health domain. I then talked about the work that we've been doing on hazard definitions and the work we've been doing there, and showed that we need to know that hazards will work. Will they be useful? Will they deliver what's needed to make sure that we all talk the same language? And address these cascading and complex hazards and risks we've discussed so much, and move towards a regular review and update. And maybe in time for a phase 2 for 2025, the global platform, as was mentioned by Manu Mitsutori. So let's get back to the key questions. The first one was really about WHO and disaster risk management. What additional actions that might engage health and well-being to reach the wider disaster risk reduction action that we need? Genta, Professor Tatano, you showed that by the WHO Health Emergency and Disaster Risk Management Research Network linking to GSDRI, we could do something really valuable. So the best outcome, I thought, was that we had this opportunity for a meeting in November between GSDRI and between WHO Kobe Centre and our research network, so we can start planning for this to really work together. And I think that's a very exciting outcome that we celebrated over supper. We also showed that by linking together, we might be able to incorporate more on youth and elderly. You demonstrated, Genta, with your work that the elderly work is really important, and we have been worried about how to support WHO COVID with this. So partnership working was absolutely critical, but also was a good discussion on behavioural science. For us, in the health domain, behavioural science is critical, and COVID-19 has shown that we all need to change our behaviours. But what was wonderful was that those who were in the audience were really anxious to see how their skills in behavioural science within GSDRI could be brought to share with WHO. So that was truly exciting. And then we looked at the hazard definitions to try and see how we could bring these together to enrich how we should work together. And I think there's a real opportunity that if UNDRR and the International Science Council want to go to a phase 2, we will have a process by which we can all share the best practices and the best knowledge between us to try and take this forward. Many thanks. Do have a look.
Thank you very much, Reggie.
All right, our final speaker of the session before we bring the panelists back up is Dr. Mizan Bisri, talking about Young Scientist session on youth and disaster risk reduction, the role of youth and young professionals in data and knowledge sharing in disaster risk management. And I guess the award for the longest title as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My name is Mizan Bisri from Kobe University, and this is a collaborative works in reporting the session 2E on the roles of youth and young professionals in data and knowledge sharing for disaster risk management. The chair and co-chair of this session is Professor Fletcher and Professor Wei Lee, and the panelists including Rio from U-Inspire Japan, Rahma, Secretary General of U-Inspire Alliance, Ranit from U-Inspire India, Maria, and also Chipo. So this session explore and test the propositions of the three roles of youth and young professional based on the panelist insights, whereby half panelists is gathering members with exposure to the U-Inspire's movement and presence, and half without. And I need to acknowledge Mark. I hope Mark is here from UK, since we also bring his perspective from Europe. So we begin these propositions that youth and young professionals can play a role as data, information, and knowledge producer, broker, or synthesizer, whereby through their activities in education and research, they bring input of data, natural science, and also social science, and through their research activities, they generate information and knowledge, whereby the outcomes is hopefully a resilient development. And I think I personally was active as member of UN MGCY, Major Group for Children and Youth. So before Sendai, I spent almost 1 year to advocate for SFDRR Article 36(2)A to include the sentence children and youth as agent of change. But what we realized, it's not enough to include youth. We need to push for young professionals, young scientists, and also young politicians and young entrepreneurs in the discussion of disaster risk management. So here we really want to explore and test what would be the best formulation of the roles of youth and young professionals. The gist of the panelist statement are as follows. First one, Rio talked and showcased the local and national collaboration and various roles of youth and young professionals within U-Inspire Japan. And what I would like to highlight is his essence, where Japanese youth clearly can shift. At the time of disaster, they play a role as volunteers. But once disasters are over, in normal times, in recovery, and for risk reduction, they play their role within the labor market. And this is the key, because in other countries, in developing countries and least developed countries, this transition cannot done swiftly, and I think Genta Sensei also explained about this. Dr. Rahma, the UNDRR Rising Award recipient and also Secretary General of U-Inspire, showed the history, the model, the movement of U-Inspire, whereby after Sendai, it quickly emerged in 14 Asia-Pacific countries with over 1,000 young professionals. And I want to highlight, it's not only scientists, but also politicians, innovators, and also entrepreneurs. And then after that, Ranit highlighted the importance of ecosystem creation, not only as volunteering works, not only as capacity building for students and for early career researchers, but genuinely for job creation. And he shows the U-Inspire India model, but also applicable in the context of Indonesia and Nepal, which I will show in a moment. Maria highlighted the experience from Colombia and the prospect and needs to create a critical mass of engagement by youth and young professionals, not only to become future leader, but also to become present leader. Dr. Chipo highlighted from the experience in Zimbabwe about why youth is important, but also provide important caution to mitigate brain drain and ensure that the biggest contribution should be made at country and also local level. So where do Inspire and GSDRI fits in this synthesis? It is about ecosystem creation. I think what over the past 5 years, we really highlight 3 models, and this is works. In India, it shows that RICA as a social venture and social entity have a close engagement with U-Inspire India and at regional and global level through U-Inspire Alliance mechanism. In Indonesia, including I myself as diaspora Indonesian exists abroad, we can also show the engagement between volunteer, young businesses, and young scientists through U-Inspire Indonesia mechanism and also U-Inspire Alliance. What do I mean by this is that here in Indonesia we have youth, we have young entrepreneurs with drone companies, creating drone companies. In normal times they conduct aerial observation for plantation, for mining, and etc. But once disaster happens, they are volunteer. They send their drones to collect emergency-related observation that the government really needs. And we have also AI companies, Chari, that shows the disaster knowledge in Indonesia. And at country level, they are competing, but at the same time cooperating for showing the potential of youth and young professionals. And also we have a similar model in Nepal, whereby there are Youth Innovation Lab and other social ventures interacting with U-Inspire Nepal as the umbrella at country level, and also leverage from the network of U-Inspire Alliance. So where GSDRI fits in? We would like to foresee closer ties, more productive, and collaboration with GSDRI Secretariat and GSDRI members. To really highlight and connect science and research with job creation, entrepreneurship, and also policy advocacy by youth and young professionals. It is about pushing for early adopters in science and technology, and also to diffuse Asia-Pacific experience and models for wider outreach. And I think we also learned there is a demand in Africa, in Americas, and also in Europe. And also to continuously prepare and producing present and future science, political, businesses leaders for sustainable disaster resilient world. We collected input throughout the sessions, both on-site and also online, and we will report back to the Secretariat what's the outcome on this. Obviously, from the floor, there are also challenges and ideas, and I would like to highlight 3 points. Number 1 is that youth and young professionals in DRM should shift beyond volunteering. It should be also about providing decent job and also decent political decision. And Mark highlighted that there is a changing landscape institution before and after COVID, and it provides opportunity for youth and young professionals. And lastly, and what is young? We also discuss about this, and we all have to be young at heart for advancing the RM, which is essentially a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary fields. And lastly, the outcomes of this session and also recommendation for GSDRI Secretariat is as follows. We have validated the role of youth and young professionals in data and knowledge sharing. We extend, it's not only about a data information producer, but it's also about gatherer and collectors. And we have the model in Asia Pacific countries through the engagement and deployment of youth having business in drone and aerial observation, crowdsourced application, and enumerator AI-based crawling engine that I highlighted earlier. Also as knowledge broker, facilitators, and also catalytic being, youth and young professionals in U-Inspire show agility to also advocate for political decision at country level, regional, and also international. Just to give a highlight, for instance, in the context of Indonesia, we will have election next year, president and everything. And for your information, all the political parties also already ask what the youth wants, what U-Inspire Indonesia can advise for all the parties, not just for one party, and also for ASEAN level. And lastly, as knowledge-based synthesizer and also implementers. And we have identified the area where we can have closer working ties with the committee within GSDRI, especially in data and institutional capacity building, and also in the advocacy. And lastly, I want to highlight and thank you for GSDRI to always providing for youth and young professionals. 2 years ago in the 5th summit, I think youth and young professionals only talk about concept and aspiration. But now in the 6th summit, we can show the model that works in at least 3 countries in Asia Pacific. And let's take action because the engine, role, and model for GSDRI fellows are there, and it's time to put it into action. I thank you all for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. I think we've gathered some rich points to discuss within this particular session. And the good news is actually we have some time that we can spend with the members of this audience as well as the panel members discussing all these issues. So I'd like to invite all the panelists to come to the stage, please, and we can then initiate the Q&A session. Thank you very much, ladies and gents, once again. The floor is really open to the audience. If there are any questions, we can ask the panelists, and I'm sure there's a lot more knowledge to be shared within this audience. So, over to you. Please, Tom.
Thanks a lot, that was very interesting. And I have a question that I would like to direct to Poonam and Virginia. It's about data. And I'm always very interested in having data at global level to describe more disaster risk. You know, and both of you mentioned on the one side the issue of gender, data around there, and Virginia from the health sector. So I was wondering if you have ideas or ways to describe better at global level in different areas how gender, the status is right now in terms of DRR, and if this can be used in some global assessments of this, or whether that's really a gap for the moment and data needs to be collected. And on the health side, Virginia, the link between DRR and health is very important at many levels, but one could be also data, and I'm wondering that the health system is collecting lots of data on mortality and morbidity. Every person that passes away on Earth is registered, and we do, or almost, I don't know, good, you shake your head, I'm very interested. The COVID statistics were officially counted by governments, but there were alternative views on this through mortality, morbidity, and the excess mortality. Now, I'm wondering if this cannot be a source of data to understand better, of course, beyond COVID, but also all other hazards, the hazards we categorize, whether data from the health sector can actually be brought into the DRR to have much more consistent and comprehensive data on this side. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. That's a brilliant question. Why do we need data? What is the importance of data, and what do we do with it? Where are we at with it? All that sort of questions come in when we talk about data. So we know generally that more women die in disaster, and women are impacted more than men. And this is kind of a general knowledge. Everybody talks about it, and that's why we end up talking about women as vulnerable category, regardless of who the women are. Could be me, even I put into the same category, and I'm more special. So we know this is a general knowledge that women are impacted, but what kind of women are impacted more? Do we have data on that? So, for instance, there was a data that came out post 2015 earthquake in Nepal that said, that was by UN Women, and that said 58% of the deaths, people who were killed in 2015 earthquake in Nepal were women. And my question was, what kind of women were they? Were they housewives? Were they working women? What kind of women died in that disaster? Were they disabled women? Who were they? We don't have the answer. So if we don't have the answer, what kind of women were impacted during the earthquake, how can we then design any intervention that would be really reflective of the reality on the ground? So that's kind of one question. Data is extremely important. I mean, we are so driven by the evidence, and lived experiences are often do not count. I don't think we are really ready to listen to anecdote. We just disregard those kind of anecdotes, and we would like to see like evidence, and evidence comes in the form of data. So, for instance, impact on children. We talk about, okay, this many children were impacted, but what kind of children were they? Were they girls, boys? We don't have data on that, and similarly on disability as well. So, therefore, I believe having gender disaggregated data, sex disaggregated data as a first step, and then gender disaggregated data as a second step. Gender disaggregated data is slightly more complicated. So once we achieve sex disaggregated data at all levels, from the impact to the intervention at all levels, then we will be able to also bring in gender element. Gender disaggregated data is different from sex disaggregated data because gender considers all of the social and gender inequalities that exist. So relational categories are also brought into the analytical framework when we talk about gender disaggregated data. So yeah, thank you.
Great answer. Well done. Tom, you are wicked. Let's start from the beginning. First of all, we didn't discuss so much of data in the workshop, but I do have in this wonderful resource, I keep on encouraging you all to look at, a large number of chapters that relate to data and health. Absolutely critical. And you ask about data in health systems. Health systems are renowned for collecting data, and we work really hard at it. But I also celebrated on Monday the fact that we have, through the World Health Organization, and as partly as a result of the public health emergencies of international concern that have been declared by the World Health Organization, a need for ministries of health to report data. And we do this in real time, a lot of the countries who have the facilities to do so, on number of cases, on number who die, and of course with COVID-19 with the number who are vaccinated, and how many vaccinations have been used. But it does depend on the country's reporting. Now, I'm told in some countries that deaths are only reported if there is a financial impact from them. So if you die in some countries, nobody writes a death certificate if you've got nothing to leave to your family. I think that's quite shocking. We know that the mortality data is not complete, and if you look at the civil registration of births and deaths that WHO keep, probably only half the world have relatively good data. I don't think that's much, and that's really frightening. And if we're trying to get mortality and morbidity data collected, it's very, very hard work to do. Now, obviously, with the COVID-19 dashboard that WHO runs, there are a lot of suggestions that it may not be complete everywhere. And John Hopkins set up an academic program very early on in the COVID-19 experience to try and bring some of that data together. And we're very much aware that whatever we've tried to do may not be complete. But within the UK, we've tried really, really, really hard to be as complete as possible. But I don't know whether you know, there were quite a lot of debates in the middle of our Houses of Parliament about if somebody gets run over by a bus who's become COVID positive, is it due to the COVID that they're run over by a bus, or is it due to the fact that the bus ran over them when they died? So actually defining how people die and how you register death is always tricky. And even in the UK, with our four-nation approach, not every nation had the identical definition of what a COVID-related death might be. So there's been quite a lot of debate, even in our small country, and trying to get it right when we really work hard at trying to do this. You ask about the mortality data, so there's been quite a few papers published, and WHO is very much aware of this, but we know that the methods that we have in the international health regulations when you do get this reporting is something that might be really useful for an all-hazards approach. So we know what is going on and how we can help best. So Tom, trying to build the mechanisms for future data collection on mortality and morbidity is something that we would really like to do better. And the World Health Organization is currently going through a very serious review of some of its systems, including whether or not the international health regulations are as complete as they should be, and whether there is a need for possibly something that might be called a pandemic treaty. So there's a lot of discussion going on there, but what worries us, that it'll be WHO only that's driving that, which will only reflect the Ministries of Health and may not reflect the whole of government and the whole of society of all the UN member states. But Bizan did something wonderful to me yesterday. He took me to one side and he told me that he, with colleagues from GSDRI and other networks, has started collecting in Indonesia the numbers of hazards and the disasters and emergencies. You reported to me yesterday, and I'm sure you could comment on this, Bizan. Sorry, but I'm so proud of the youth network that we have within GSDRI and the fact that you use anything we can offer. That you had over 3,000 disasters in Indonesia in 2022 alone. That's one country. I know it's the fourth biggest, but you're reporting things that others don't. Come on, Bizan, celebrate it.
Thank you so much, Virginia, for highlighting that. What Virginia just mentioned is not only we crowdsource the number of hazard and disaster events, we also create this machine-assisted engine that essentially can marriage between the function of Google Scholars and Google Maps about disaster risk, knowledge, and scientific product in Indonesia, and we geotag them down to village level. And I would like to acknowledge here Professor Ono, because 4 years ago, I just showed one poster in World Bonsai Forum. But now, this engine is actually working. So, if, let's say, Tom write a paper about Indonesia, people don't need to find Tom's publication. Our engine can show already where is the village affected by Tom's paper. And it's live, it's working, it's a bulletproof engine, and now we are thinking how to expand it further in marrying with health sector, with environment and others. Thank you.
All right, we have a comment in the back.
From University. Since the data issue was raised by Tom, I'd like to compliment a little bit of this disaster loss and damage data. Yes, the disaggregated data is important, but even before talking about disaggregated data, we still don't have aggregated data yet through many countries. So that's the first step to go, but I really think that disaggregated data should be collected through the national government. Because unless we know the details, we cannot tackle the problems, gender, doing many, details. Then with knowing the detailed damage losses, we can tackle with some policies. But my question is to Virginia. Yesterday, or maybe 2 days ago, we saw that COVID-19, the distribution map of death by the COVID-19. That Africa was very, very low represented. So is this real, or the African people are immune to the COVID, or they are missing? Could you comment on this one?
Yuichi, this is not part of the workshop report, but thank you so much for your query. Yes, we have been really worried that the data is not complete in many countries. but also how you measure a death from COVID requires you, in many countries, to have a system by which you can test people. And tests were not necessarily universal, although we tried really hard to make them much more universal through many networks, from Gavi and other networks through WHO, and to build all these testing mechanisms that I suspect all of us have been trying whenever we were worried that we might have been unwell or were required to go to work to test ourselves before we went. It's been a huge exercise, but also agreeing that the tests are universal. Remember that when COVID-19 happened, we didn't know much about the virus. We didn't know how it would work. We didn't know the impacts. And of course, we are really still working on this. We still hold the information that we have on COVID-19 in our hazard information profiles as a draft. We know it's not complete yet. And I don't know how many of you are aware of your colleagues, your friends, your families, people who have been exposed to COVID and thankfully have survived, who are now concerned about developing long COVID. So from the health point of view, the data is still very complicated, and there is probably much more we need to learn. And it's only by working in a scientific network like this and others that we begin to gather more evidence and more information to do this. But I just wanted to add one thing that I found very difficult when I was looking at a lot of the science that was coming out about COVID, was that we probably had over 100 plus preprint or peer-reviewed publications every single day. There are over several million peer-reviewed papers or preprint papers that have been published, and trying to collate this into a common understanding has been a huge task. The one thing WHO did do, which I thought was fantastic, was that they agreed the priorities for research very early on, that we had a system by which we could hold all the funders of research who tried to pull processes to get different research projects pulled together, and to identify who in the world was the owner of that research, which university, which academic network, and how we could do that. We really built an incredible research network to understand it. The only thing we didn't achieve were all the outputs from all those research networks. So again, that was not addressed in the workshop, but it is very kind of you to share those requests.
Yeah, thank you. Just short comment on this. Japan has been, Ministry of Health and the related agency provided lots of detailed data. So it was very helpful to understand what's going on. But we are downgrading this now from 2 to 5 category, and by doing that, we will have a serious risk. We will not have data anymore in the future. So that we cannot see what is happening. Maybe 2 months later, we will not. It's going to be invisible. So I'm afraid this data missing is a risk. So, well, anyway, this is out of scope, but COVID or the health issue or the disaster loss and damage data issue, it's all data. It's very important to have a clarified data, and with data we can do analysis. So I just wanted to, again, the importance of data, and disaggregate data. Then we have to support, maybe, scientists cannot only own the data, the government is trying to collect the loss and damage data, and if they have a good data, they can make a better policy, and then we scientists need to help them to make a better policy. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Just briefly, I wanted to comment. So I totally agree on not having data, and we need to collect aggregated data first. But then I do not agree on let's first collect aggregated data and think about disaggregated later, because it reinforces the same notion that gender as non-urgent can be put aside for now. Let's deal with the first urgent stuff, and then we'll deal with the gender issues later. Gender is part of everything, and therefore it has to be brought into the conversation right from the beginning. So therefore, I would say that both aggregated and disaggregated data can be collected at the same time. We just need to put the emphasis on that.
My point was for governments to do this aggregated data first. I'm correcting the disaggregated data. So we scientists, government has a different approach, I think.
All right, thank you. Great discussion. I think we have one question over here on your far right there. got a microphone. Thank you. And then I actually have a question as well, but I'll wait and be last. So.
Thank you. My name is Kenji Tanaka from GSDRI. So I want to ask this community is there any possibility to recover the past data or data rescue of the past event, even though they didn't directly collect the disaster statistics, but if someone has knowledge, then is it any way to recover such information from other source of data, like population, economic activity, and some other source of data we can reproduce or estimate the past damage or impacted people's information. Is it possible to do such things? The lost data, recover or rescue data.
Do we have a volunteer for that? Okay, on the end here.
Thank you for this question. If you go to this website, this engine that I create, the information is not there yet. The engine is knowledge.caribencana.id. At the moment, it's only scientific papers, geotech down to village level. But I want to highlight, sir, at the moment in Indonesia, we are doing things to recover past data. And one of our, there are two approaches that we are doing at the moment, and this is in close collaboration with the BNPB, National Disaster Management Authority. Number one, now we are curating paintings, history archive about past disaster, even during Dutch occupation in Indonesia. So we geotech all the information from museums, the painting about disaster, and then we overlay it with the population data at that point of time. And number two, another efforts that we are doing at the moment is we are making explicit the detached knowledge and the folklore in villages in Indonesia. This is still work in progress. I am happy to share the details later on. What I saw, something similar, is currently being done in Harvard. I think in the Harvard Center of Japanese Studies, they are now developing Japan Disaster Archive, whereby they trace also the past folklore paintings about disasters in Japan, I think all the way to Sengaku Jidai and perhaps even before that. So I think this is some efforts. Of course, it's not perfect, but this is an effort to create data or to recover past data.
All right, thank you. Yeah, please.
Professor Tanaka, what kind of data rescue are you talking about? Are you talking about data rescue for hazard or damage?
Damage to people's number or something. So if they don't directly collect it, maybe other source of data can estimate the change of such people.
Okay, from my knowledge, data rescue for hazards is really okay. So it is so-called proxy data, like IPCC report. We can estimate hazard, historical hazard intensity based on something. But for long-term damage, must be a little bit tough. Especially if you want to estimate long-term damage for a few thousand years, it must be pretty tough. It must be a big challenge for us.
Thank you. Jean, I think you had a question.
Yes, so Jean-Paul Pinelli from Floriatech. First of all, thanks for very interesting summaries over such a wide range of topics. I guess I have two questions or comments, and one is for Maurice Sensei. I saw that in one of your slides you refer to standardized format, talking in the context of the experimental facilities. I will submit or share that in our experience as I said that first I'm involved with the development of Design Safe, which is a data platform in the US. And what we found is that actually trying to impose a standard format or like a one-size-fits-all is actually counterproductive because you have a lot of different experimental facilities, a lot of different instrumentation projects, etc. So I think that when creating databases, in our experience, it's better to make sure that we have a common taxonomy, that we speak the same language, but that flexibility in the format is key. So that what's really important is to make sure that the data has the correct metadata, so that the researchers do the correct data curation, but leave open the particular details of the format of the data, and with current technology, notebooks, etc., you can always reformat the data in form or shape that you want. So that's one comment, and maybe you might want to share your experience on that. The other comment I have is for Poonam. I thought that it was really interesting the comment you had about resiliency and the fact that resiliency might not be necessarily good if you are trying to put back together something which is originally bad. And as an engineer, right, that's the concept which is kind of foreign to me, and so I thought it's interesting, and that maybe something we need to think about, and I would appreciate if you could expand also a little bit on that.
Thank you very much. I agree with you. Maybe flexibility and unification are kind of trade-off, but it's very important. So I know the Design Safe US has been succeeded, and in Japan we have different type of data archive systems, so-called DS and SIP4D. And additionally, in climate science in Europe has a covariance dataset. So it is getting to unified, but we still have a kind of gap between country by country or region by region. So it must be good to communicate between different society and country to establish kind of common format or common database idea. And might be gallery is one option to discuss about these kinds. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm really glad to hear a lot of interest from the physical scientists as well, if I could say, on resilience. Actually, this is a question that bothers us as social scientists quite a lot, because all of the concepts are taken either for granted or it's been instrumentalized. So, for instance, Build Back Better is such a beautiful concept, but then it's been instrumentalized and social considerations are not given its due kind of attention. Resilience is another concept that just is taken for granted and really put into a formula, so vulnerability plus whatever, and then you come out with something that is more resilient. May look, if we are looking and taking into consideration the material reality of the world, but in social world it doesn't work. So for instance, have we thought about how can we then be resilient to domestic violence in disaster context? How in some contexts there are no definitions of resilience. For instance, I come from Nepal. There is no word as such called resilience. That doesn't exist. Means if it happens, we will just manage it. That's how it's been. There is no other support, so this community come together and just manage it. So there is no concept of resilience, and because of the international kind of discourse around resilience and so much funding on it, everybody is inventing the word and trying to do that. And in effect, actually, they are doing the same thing that they were doing it. So the problem is with the instrumentalization. So the message for me would be, in this very short time, would be not to take any concepts for granted and question that when using it. So that would be something that I just wanted to add. but maybe we can have further conversation. We have written a paper on resilience, and maybe I could give that details to you where we have discussed how resilience is understood in 5 different countries and what do we take out of that. How can we understand resilience as a social process, not as something technical fix? So I would be happy to share that article with you.
Thank you.
And I would love to join that conversation if I can be invited, just for fun. So that sounds interesting.
We'll think about that.
So we've got one question over here, and then I think we still have a question there, and then we better close out, or you won't get any coffee before the closing session. So, John.
Yeah, thank you very much for the very nice summary from all the panel sessions. And the purpose of the panel session entirely, that is a new challenge for the action by GSDRI. So I'd like to ask you one sentence, or one word, or one paragraph, maybe in short, right? From your discussion, what we should do, or what you want to do, maybe as an action of the GSDRI, from each group, if possible, please let us know. Like, for instance, Nobuhito's presentation, maybe we can establish a kind of activity for the sharing the data, or maybe proposal, whatever. But anyway, such a short proposal, if you have, please let us know. That would be very nice. We can share out from the results of your discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sensei. So we'd like to start with our first panelist, if you don't mind.
I think I already did, right?
No, yeah. Okay. Yeah, you itemize the kind of the contents, but you want to do this through what way?
So one idea that we may establish kind of working group on use of the large-scale facility for other small-scale. That is a kind of short sentence.
Yeah, that kind of thing maybe it would be very valuable. Thank you very much.
And the other 4 panelists, you can't just say you're establishing a working group. So we just joking.
Thank you, Professor Tatano. In our session group, we emphasize the importance of data sharing, especially for vulnerable regions in developing countries. So this GSDRI is a good platform to first communicate information and share experiences. Through that, I think that this GSDRI platform can be used to establish some systematic way to share data in vulnerable regions.
In our group, we actually discussed quite a lot about, of course, social phenomenon, and we said how we should not be settling for the existing definition and how we should be questioning that all the time in our own context. And we also talked about being aware of our own positionality, so that we do not take any knowledge for granted, but that situate within our own context, and also look at our own positionality within the context of our research. So that is kind of the key message. Thank you.
Well, Professor Tatano, you probably know what mine is. Health needs to work with GSDRI. GSDRI needs to work with health.
Yeah, of course, that's very clear.
And I think that's such an exciting message, and the support you gave us yesterday in our workshop was fantastic. And I hope very much you will be working with the Kobe Center soon. Thank you. Every thanks.
Thank you so much, Tatano Sensei. Let me re-emphasize our recommendation for youth and young professionals. Number 1, yesterday, I think in Ritsuko Honda Sensei's presentation and Irashiman Sensei, there are terms GSDRI Young Fellows, and we have this idea since 5th summit. But what we would like to recommend is from You Inspire model, we know how to make it works with a substantial number of youth and young professionals. Our recommendation, GSDRI should continue capacitating and also strengthening the career ladder of young scientists and young researchers, but it is not enough to tackle our challenge.
So let's collaborate with You Inspire movement, because there we also preparing career ladder for young politicians, young entrepreneurs, young artists, and think about how they can contribute for our societal challenge. So we are ready to become GSDRI operational agent.
Thank you very much. Yeah. And then definitely the gender question and the young scientist question, young youth questions, maybe please let us know in the website. We should make some kind of special announcement to join that groups or some discussion groups, right? It may be for only also for the climate change discussion, but maybe what we can is very limited. But please let us know what would be the best way to promote your discussion, right? Result of the discussion. Thank you very much.
I think we have one more question, and then we're going to close out the session.
Hello. Yeah, thank you. I'm Shubho from GSDRI University. I have one comment and one short question to Poonam. One thing is that no one is really disabled. We are specially abled or excellently abled. This is my comment. And the second thing is that I believe in your group there are more women participants. Do you believe that your participants think they are more vulnerable or more resilient than other genders? Or nothing like that? Only we are not able to hear your status. What is the problem? And if this is so, what is your recommendation to GSDRI on this? Thank you.
Thank you. I agree with your first comment, of course. That was used only for we all understand that what it means, and we didn't have time to explain, but I totally agree with your first comment. Second comment, our participants in that particular round tour are just like you. They're resilient at some point, they're vulnerable at some point, they're all human beings. So we are exactly just like you, sometimes resilient, sometimes vulnerable, sometimes leader, sometimes beneficiary. There is absolutely no difference, and that's how it should be understood. In our conversations, we talked quite a lot about how women are doing such wonderful jobs and making changes at the community level, but that's not recognized purely because of the way we understand women's role in DRI, because through a vulnerability lens. So that is kind of the main conversation. So we are neither vulnerable nor resilient. We are just as human as you are, and all of the participants of the doctor were just like that, and likewise the community people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we are just about 10 minutes over schedule. So let me finish this session by thanking all the audience. To start with, I think we had a fantastic discussion today. And at the same time, one thing that I've observed about all our panelists is that I think we have covered, as GSDRI, we have covered all the themes that we needed to cover, and our committees are working really, really hard to address all the concerns, all the queries, all the areas that we need to cover under the disaster risk reduction aspect. So with that, let's show our appreciation once again to the panelists, please. And finally, let me thank my colleague and the co-author, John. Thank you.
Thank you. We have coffee break now. Again, there's some announcement I would like to make. We have 2 more seats for the Fujikawa Open Laboratory. So if you are interested, please register yourself for the session. That will give you some real-life experience of disaster. That will be a slide.
This is the 6th GSDRI Summit. One of the proud traditions, besides having this very important dialogue and sharing, is that the summits conclude with a statement. A statement reflecting the conversations and the learning that we have had together, and allow us to put on the record what we believe we have achieved by coming together as we have here today. So in this session, I'm looking forward to Hiro and Andrew, who have been very carefully following all of the conversations and pacing so many people down to find your words to put together into a closing statement here on behalf of all of us here at the summit. Hiro, Andrew, over to you.
Thank you very much for gathering. Based on all of the presentation, keynotes and panel sessions and panel discussions, we have also requested all of the chair of the panel session to provide what are the key points to be included in the resolution. And then Andrew kindly make a kind of complete document for this at this occasion. I would like to ask Andrew to show that result and share with you first.
So what we've got is our document from this, the outcomes and resolutions, we've called it. I'll explain what's happening. And as Professor Tatana was just explaining, this is the product of lots of people who've been sending in information on their sessions, outcomes from their individual presentations. So it is really a collective of plenaries, the working committees, and also the other sessions we had after that. So we tried to capture as much as possible. On the other hand, we need something kind of quite brief and to the point that we can work with. It is just a draft at this point. I think in previous global summits of GSDRI there have been, we've ended up with maybe about a page and a half. This time we're on about 4 and a bit pages. That's summarizing down the material that was sent in. If we work with all the material that was sent in, of course, it would be many, many more pages. So we've had to try and summarize and also consolidate. This means that we're not acknowledging the individual contributors. This is a collective effort. Okay, so we get sometimes, like items coming from several people contributing basically to the same point. Obviously, we're just synthesizing. Good. Okay. So you can start to see it now. Okay. So I'll just explain the document we've got there. And this will need a little bit of refining, of course. And the expectation is probably that in improving some of the text as we go, I hope you appreciate this is still having bits added and changed up until about half an hour ago. So clearly it will need checking for any smaller errors and things like that. But the idea is that we'll refine this and reduce the words rather than add to them. Okay, but in doing that, if you do spot obvious things, then you have an opportunity to perhaps flag that before we go any further. So it's basically in 4 sections. So the first section are the affirmations, if you like, coming from the types of presentations we've had. Do you want to take them?
Yeah.
So the affirmations, I can't see them. Oh, I can see them there. That's all right. So I'll be looking this way. Sorry, it's not on the computer. But you can see what we have up there. And these are affirmations. We start really with, I suppose, what we call the Latin the opening. The UNDRR midterm review was already sort of considered to be really pivotal in terms of the timing of this summit as well. And therefore, we really flagged that up at the top just to make this fit into the context of the midterm review. So there's a statement there, and I'll have to read it here. But the member institutions of Global Alliance of Disaster Research Institutes GSDRI fully recognize the importance of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, SEDI Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015-2030 midterm review. So that's the context in which we are working. Now, the text that follows is, as I say, the synthesis then of what we have from quite a lot of presentations and comments which have been captured. And so the text has been taken from the 2 comments that Wilma has requested we send in advance as well. So that actually made the drafting has got a lot easier. But we've had to change some of the material sent in. It was too long and so forth. But it seems to summarize down to these points. Okay, so that's the section 1. And whilst you're just looking at that, the section 2 moves to the committees, the GSDRI committees, and the reports from those committees. And then section 3 from the other additional sessions, special sessions really. And then at the end we have a section which is for the resolutions. Now before I go into any further detail with this, I'd just like to clarify that for the resolutions, the idea really that the way we function in GSDRI is that these will be taken to the board of directors. This So the whole content of this document will go to the board of directors. And our recommendation to the board is that they basically accept any of the actions which you find within here. So obviously the first part is more affirmations, and then we move down to some of the more specific action points as we get further. Okay. Now, in the interest of time, we only have a very short period here, so I think I'm going to definitely make sure that everybody can see the whole document, but there isn't really time to go word for word, as you might find in some forums. I think we can safely say that unless you have a major problem with something, then arguing over the minutiae of small wording is probably not useful use of our time here today. Okay, this is not the Sendai framework. You need to sit up all night and pizza going in, just over 3 or 4 words. I don't think you'll find that is the case. However, if you do spot something which is misrepresenting the words you were using that you've contributed here, then clearly you need to flag that and let us know before this goes any further. Okay, so moving down now, reading at speed. The list continues of these affirmations. Just to say, this is quite a rich array of contributions people have made to bring this number of these affirmations all the way down to 1.12. So that's actually the end of that section at the bottom. Okay? So just leave that there for a moment also, because it takes some time to read. You see something very conspicuous by its absence. Okay, something that is missing, then you should let us know really before the end of this session. The totality of what we have. Okay.
Does it come down later? There's no sort of affirmation about inclusive and equitable results and progress results.
Yeah, you need a microphone.
So I was just asking, in this affirmative section, is there a reference to inclusive, equitable, disastrous reduction, or in particular in relation to gender, as we were hearing in the previous section?
Maybe it could be emphasized a bit more in this section. Of course, it appears in detail further on, but it would be nice to have as a headline along with the rest of these.
My opinion is, really, the times have moved on. We need to put this up front now. We just can't have it taken down later in the document.
Yes, okay. Point taken. And I think the reason why that's happened in terms of the structure of the document is because the focus was actually on that particular session. And we didn't actually have a plenary presentation on that topic, or maybe that was missing. We had that really captured in view immediately. But we can bring that up nonetheless, because this is meant to reflect the collective outcome of the whole summit, in which case it doesn't need to be just based on what we had in plenaries.
No, thank you, I appreciate it. But I think this is obviously one of the criticisms of the global platform in Bali, that actually, in a sense, that there was no space for discussion of those issues.
Yes. I propose, and this is now a proposal then, that we take a portion of the text, which you'll see further on, which is actually in the report back on individual sessions, and promote it into these affirmations. If anyone's got any objections, let us know, but I would think that's the logical response to it. Okay, anything else? Okay, so that's been noted. Right, moving on then. So we now have the gathering committees on networking, science and technology roadmap, institutional capacity building, data and information sharing, and advocacy report the following. Okay, so we thought it best to leave this as what is reported from those sessions, but clearly in the reporting we have quite a strong steer on things which should happen. Okay, so these are now on the networking. We have this summary here. Just to say that this is where we have to go really by what we've been given. And, you know, that I noticed in the feedback sessions, what we're sometimes hearing in the feedback is a little bit different to what we have here. And so I have a proposal there that Chair will need to confirm. Yes?
Sorry, Andrew. About the section 1, I didn't see anything about transdisciplinarity. I think this approach is very important if we really want to manage disaster risk in an integrated perspective. So I was wondering if we could add that.
Yeah, it's possibly conspicuous by its absence in this section.
Thank you.
Are you taking comments? Okay. I'll go back to 2, but if people do think of more things, we can simply revert back to section 1. So section 2, we have the points of the network. So the points I'm going to make here, this is what we captured from the feedback that was sent in. It has been edited because some of it's too lengthy, and in a few cases it's just been worded very slightly, hopefully not changing the meaning, just to make it fit the flow of the document. Okay? So we have a slightly varying lengths of contributions between them, and that doesn't particularly matter. Okay, so we have that, and I think it's safe to say that with permission of the Chair and the Secretariat, can I suggest that should there be any final and last adjustments you might like to make to this, which don't include adding a lot of additional points, but perhaps modifying things to convey better or clarifying what was meant, you are still invited even after this session to come back and just comment on that. Okay. Otherwise, if we go point by point now, we will be here quite late.
I agree with Andrew. And actually, maybe Paul, actually, this resolution maybe is a kind of the resolution of this summit, but not completely binding the decision of the board of directors of GSDRI. So, but the final decision can be made at the board of directors meeting, which will be take place in the June. I think that time also I would like to have a kind of the committees explanation for these activities. So definitely based on that and this agreement or resolutions, definitely we would like to elaborate the activities for each committee. That is great. So, but to have that maybe better was a wording or something missing. Maybe we may Secretariat can put the circulate this into each committees and the participants. And if you have the kind of particular suggestions, please let us know. That will be considered by the chair of the committee, and Andrea and myself and Paul will say, if necessary, we can modify this. If you agree, then we would like to proceed that way. But basically, I would like to ask you to accept the all these types of structures. I mean, key points, and then the second one is for the committees, our activities. Third one is for the kind of new challenges, sessions outcomes, and then the final one is these findings could be, let's say, maybe reflected by in the decision in the board of directors. That's it, right? Yeah.
Yes, it's point 4. So rather than trying to go through each point the whole way through the document to list them here. I think the way we're operating now with committees and special sessions means that they're all noted, they're all part of the working gallery. Therefore, unless there's anything you see in those reports that you object to, then these are proposed to the board of directors to act upon, to incorporate. Okay. Is that reasonably clear? So it's worded here. So in response to these points recorded from the summit, GSDRI resolves to bring all the above affirmations, findings and outcomes to its board of directors as GSDRI resolutions. So it's quite strong. This is resolutions, it's not just recommendations. It's quite a strong document. Shall we just have a look at, perhaps very briefly, then some of the things which have come up? So I'm just taking back up to section 2, so we've got networking. There's a list here, we had that one on the screen for quite a while, so I'll move to the next. So there's data and information sharing.
Sorry, Andrew, just for a moment. The intention is to email this to everybody today. Is that the plan?
Yes, I can be done. Yeah, it's great. It's going to be done. I have the very small edits. It's ready to go. Okay, so this is the data and information sharing starts at 2.4. It's included in here. This one possibly is it's not too long. We managed to edit it down to the key points. And then we have added 2.5. Because those have been involved in drafting these points before we immediately recognize the text. And then 3. This one we started off with just a series on this big science, the DRI, large scale experiments. So we were saying it's just the bullets to start with, which is that list of bullets there. But then we got a second mailing which emphasized these following points as well. So we may well just leave it like this unless that group feels that this doesn't look so I don't like it to be. Okay? So that is, see the points go down to just the end of the paragraph there. And then you've got 3.2, sustainable DRR integrated climate action, SDGs, new DRR and data sharing experience. Yes. We have the gender and inclusivity in DRR policy and practice, and now this is where we're going to respond to the point about section 1. Some of this. So I think it would be reasonably straightforward to take something from here and put it up into the headlines. And actually, if the people who were chairing that committee would like to propose which part of it, or perhaps just a sort of collective comment, take on this and put it up, that would be quite handy. If everyone's agreed to that in principle, then maybe we don't need to get the exact wording here again next time. Get it right. We've got the health into disaster risk reduction and recovery, and as Virginia was talking just less than an hour ago about this, we've tried to capture the real headline now, which is the session affirms the broad principles of putting health into DRR and recovery, which is the theme of this session. Of course, we have the case study. There's only 3 points in here, but they're quite substantive. So this is the link with WHO is highlighted within this, just the 3 points under this section. And then third of all, this point was taken from also some of the feedback this morning, which comes out of that session. Okay, so there's action there. And then on the last one, 3.5, youth and DRR. This one I've noted that in the feedback session just now, so to be fair to the ones that were only feedbacking just a few minutes before this session, you may want to, if you have the agreement, perhaps we could invite people involved with the drafting, the youth of the DRR session. Fantastic set of comments were made actually on the stage now. It was shown to everybody. And I think it's only fair that we try to capture that accurately here. And if you feel you want to add a bit more to this, or because in these 3 points, these were the earlier points, I think it's not too late to do that. Okay? That's it.
Okay, so thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Harold. A lot of work. And thank you to everybody. This was a week of work and quite a bit of effort to prepare to be here. So a very extended period of effort. What was shared with you is this is the statement that reflects what we have accomplished this week and what it is that we have discussed and we share as our beliefs. The document's interesting, but the document isn't the same as outcomes and actions. So besides having this document be with your help finalized, the goal is to act on all of this. And so part of the way GSDRI has been working to organize to work with member institutions to achieve these primary goals that we set out in our charter is we've set up a series of committees. And most of our committees right now have just a few people. They've only met a couple times. We have a very long list of things that we are now trying to achieve. So I hope everybody here will think about where you would like to be involved. And it is specifically through volunteering to be part of these committees. And we do work on the specific things we've all come together. That's how we accomplish it. How we actually go from writing a really important document into changing things. By participating on committees, that kind of networking will allow seeking joint funding, collaboration on publications. There's a variety of things that I hope will be very tangible outcomes for those who volunteer. And in a moment, we're going to close this summit and go to the annual general meeting. And at the annual meeting, we will be asking one representative of each of the institutions to participate and represent the institution. For this structure of GSDRI moving forward, we are not looking for one representative. If there's several of these different topics that you are interested in, or others within your institution, please volunteer. Have more than one person involved. Be involved in several committees. This is how GSDRI is working to allow you to do what you are doing, but also allow us to achieve more than what we would do if we were all working independently. So through these committees, through these guidance of what can be accomplished, there's a true hope that more and more will volunteer. You go back to the institution, encourage your colleagues, volunteer. Your work is very much tied to what this group is working on. And it's now becoming much more tangible and specific as the leadership and the conversation this week. So with that, again, thank you. And you're a lot of work here to pull all of this together. Not quite done yet. Thank you to everybody who made the contribution and the work that we did to wrap all of this. So with that, let's close the session.
Maybe one thing I'd like to ask you to take adoption of this, say, draft, yeah?
So we have to think about make a formal motion. Can Andrew, you make the motion?
The motion is that we bring all of our findings and outcomes to the board of directors as GSDRI resolutions.
Okay. And Gerald, are you ready to second the motion? Okay, so first show of hands. Those in favor?
That doesn't make life easy.
Yeah, any opposed? Any opposed or with concerns that we need to talk about before we move forward? Okay, I saw that as unanimous, so that is adopted. Yeah.
Thank you, Paul. And then shall we move for the, say, closing remark session? So shall we move? Yeah, thank you very much, Paul.
Yes, may I request Professor Fujioka to start?
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Fujioka, now Vice Director of TBRI. So, we have successfully come to the closing session of the 6th Global Summit of Gathering. Thank you very much. The final remarks is delivered by the Director-elect for the next fiscal year. So I'm happy to say that Professor Eiichi Nakakita is once again the Director-elect for DBRI in the next fiscal year. So now I give the floor to Professor Nakakita.
Again, this is Eiichi Nakakita. Thank you very much for your all kinds of effort for at this time. Anyway, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, I would like to start my remarks by saying congratulations to all of you and express my gratitude to all speakers and panelists for enlightening us and sharing us their expertise and various visions during the past 2.5 days. My deepest appreciation also goes to the participants, presenters, supporters, and everyone involved from the planning, organization, and the implementation of the 6th Global Summit of Gathering. So there was a fascinating lineup of keynote speakers, experienced experts in diverse backgrounds, who others captivate with their speech, broaden our scope, and makes us want to evaluate our research to do more for the communities, countries, and regions. So just to mention for a few examples. So we are very happy to welcome Ms. Mami, Ms. Tori from the UNDRR. She appreciated that some survey conducted by Gathering, and she presented some of the key findings from the recent completed midterm review of the Center Framework for the Disaster Reduction and highlights from the UN Global Assessment Report 2022. She mentioned that in the 1915's GAR declared that the era of hazards by hazards risk reduction is over, and the risk is systemic, and it crosses borders. So that they are not siloed, but the approach to risk management is very much siloed. And that the conventional risk management and the crisis response system are not working. Failure to plan is a plan to fail. So she thanks us for being a community that cares for the resilience of our people and encouraged us to market resilience in a way that we can ask people to build their resilience to have a stable future. And also we are glad to have Professor Mustafa Evdik from the Boğaziçi University who shared with us the first-hand and detailed information about the tragic two large earthquakes that hit southern region of Turkey just 9 hours apart. So he informed us that what is needed is a rhetorical campaign to improve the earthquake performance of buildings that does not require require tenants to vacate their apartments, and the revision for earthquake performance objectives of Retorium. And Professor Masahide Kimoto stated that the science should contribute to the people's section, since science can contribute and should provide information to support policy planning and make the citizen better. I am involved in this. And while Professor Paul Canvas presenting on the recovery planning stated, we have the potential to do better within the country because of the science and knowledge that we are generating. The recovery conversation is a big opportunity to both be transformative, to take our science and push for things in recovery that are hard to do the rest of time. And Professor Virginia Murray stated that the climate crisis is definitely a health crisis. So it is rapidly growing. With many examples of recently published literature sources, she made us aware and understand some of the risks of the extreme events and highly translated into the impacts and the disasters. So regarding the digital twinning of communication for disaster risk reduction, Professor John Van Lind discussed how to improve the resilience, to measure resilience of a community, to improve it, and improving the resilience through communication, decision, and actionable strategies is the goal. So then, also the panel discussion sessions brought another group of the scholars from the diverse background. For example, the group 1A had a kind of coffee-style discussion session. And in group 1C, the professor, Lady Birahaji Kusuma, the director of the Institute of Technology, Bandung, Indonesia, delivered an online keynote speech to kick off the session. So this message could, coupled with the presentations by all other panelists from the academia, government, media, and the UN, have given us much food for thought. Undoubtedly, will further enhance our perception on the disaster risk reduction and resilience, and will greatly contribute to simulate our work and collaborations as a core in all of society approach. So I'd like to thank all the panel group chairs and co-chairs for their roles in organizing their respective sessions with much care and diligence to deliver the result we saw in the outcome report itself. And I would also like to thank the session chairs who too did an excellent job supporting each plenary and discussion session and keeping everything lovely and on track. So most of all, I thank you, the participant. So without your contribution and inputs, ideas, the discussion sessions and this summit do not have achieved the result noted in the final outcome document. Our expectations from the conference have exceeded our lofty goals. So now it is up to all of us to take the outcome confirmed in the conference resolution document forward to the future. We will once again have the chance to evaluate the result of our research activities and how best we were able to promote the implementations of goals and the target of the Sendai Framework Agenda in 2 years' time. I'm convinced that the contacts and the collaborations from here are useful and beneficial, and they will continue into the future to form fruitful research and institutional collaboration. I'd like to end my remarks by stating that it is a great privilege for us, the TPRI, Kyoto University, and Kyoto University, to host the gathering. By supporting the gathering, it also gives us the chance to increase our visibility among the international community as an international research institute of excellence in the field of the disaster risk reduction and resilience to disaster. Together, we can strengthen collaborations and build on our common objectives to create a sustainable disaster resilient world. I enjoyed interacting with you during the past 3 days, educated myself with much inspiring and stimulating discussion. So I wish you all the best, the very best in your endeavor, and wish you future prosperity, and also a safe journey back home. So I now officially close the 6th Global Summit of Gathering. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nakita Sensei. Let me close this closing session. So please enjoy this afternoon and see you in the closing banquet in this evening. Thank you very much.
Please go to visit seminar room 4 and 5 for the enrollment. We'll have a general assembly at 4 p.m. at Campus Plaza here. We have some lost and found items, charger, headphones, a beautiful bag.